I never expected to find myself standing at the edge of a boundary I vowed never to cross, until that stormy night. The flicker of candlelight, the gentle brush of his hand, and the words he whispered shattered the silence of my carefully crafted world. "Maybe we both needed this," he said, his eyes locking with mine. In that moment, I realized everything was about to change forever. My name is Martha, and my life had been one of quiet solitude since the passing of my husband, George, 5 years ago. Our marriage, though childless, had been a partnership of mutual respect and love. After his death, I settled into a routine of gardening, reading, and finding solace in the stillness of my New England home. It was a life of quiet reflection, until the day my niece, Kate, called with an unusual request. Her son, Ryan, was struggling after a tumultuous year in college and needed a place to reset before returning for his final year. At first, I hesitated. At 65, I wasn't sure if I was up for the task of hosting a 23-year-old in my home. Yet Kate's earnestness and the fond memories I held of Ryan as a boy swayed me. I agreed, thinking his presence might bring some life to the quiet that had settled over my home. When Ryan arrived, I barely recognized him. Gone was the lanky, eager 16-year-old I remembered. In his place stood a confident young man with broad shoulders, piercing blue eyes, and a quiet demeanor that hinted at maturity beyond his years. His arrival was like a fresh breeze, instantly transforming the atmosphere of the house. Ryan quickly became an integral part of my daily life, helping with household tasks and spending long evenings discussing literature, architecture, and life. He was thoughtful, intelligent, and quietly captivating in ways I hadn't anticipated. His passion for his studies and dreams of designing sustainable communities reminded me of the fervor I had once felt in my youth. One evening, as we shared a bottle of wine and he recounted a project close to his heart, I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. His animated expressions and earnest enthusiasm stirred something deep within me. It was a simple moment of connection, or so I told myself at the time. Yet, as the days passed, I couldn't ignore the subtle shift in our dynamic. Gestures that lingered too long, glances that seemed more than casual. The life I thought was settled began to feel anything but. I found myself caught between the safety of routine and the unsettling allure of something I didn't dare to name. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, but once noticed, the shift in our interactions was undeniable. Ryan's presence in the house seemed to fill the empty spaces I hadn't realized were there. Our mornings began with coffee, his deep voice breaking the quiet as he shared stories or insights from his studies. Evenings were spent side by side, our conversations drifting into personal territory, his uncertainties about the future, my reflections on a past filled with what-ifs. At first, I convinced myself that my feelings were simply a natural response to companionship after years of solitude. But then came the moments that made me question everything. The way his hand brushed against mine as he passed me a plate. The way his eyes lingered just a second too long when he thought I wasn't paying attention. There was an undercurrent to our interactions that I couldn't dismiss. One particularly stormy evening, the power went out, plunging the house into silence. As the rain battered the windows, Ryan and I lit candles and settled in the living room. The flickering light cast long shadows, and the quiet between us felt heavy charged. When he turned to me and said, "I don't know what I would have done without you this summer," his voice carried a depth that made my heart skip a beat. I laughed it off, attributing his gratitude to the wine we had been sharing, but the sincerity in his eyes stayed with me long after I retired to my room that night. Over the next few weeks, these moments grew more frequent. A lingering touch on my shoulder. A quiet compliment on how youthful I looked in the summer light. An intensity in his gaze that seemed to cut through my carefully maintained composure. I tried to convince myself it was all innocent, a product of my imagination, but deep down I knew better. It was during one of our quiet dinners that the boundary I had so carefully maintained began to waver. He reached across the table to take my hand, a gesture that might have seemed harmless to an outsider. But in that moment, his touch felt different. His thumb grazed over my knuckles, and when I looked up, I saw something in his expression I couldn't ignore. Affection? Desire? It was impossible to tell. "Ryan," I began, my voice trembling, "we need to talk." But he interrupted, his tone calm yet earnest. "I know what you're going to say. And I want you to know, I'd never do anything to make you uncomfortable." His words reassured me, yet they didn't erase the tension that had been building between us. That night, as I lay awake, replaying his words and the way his eyes had searched mine, I realized I was standing on a precipice. One step forward, and everything I thought I knew about myself, about him, would change. Still, I couldn't deny the thrill that came with his presence. The way his laughter brightened the room, the way he spoke with such conviction about his dreams. I began to look forward to our shared moments, even as I dreaded the feelings they stirred within me. Each day brought a new question, a new uncertainty. Was I imagining this connection, or was there something unspoken passing between us? And if it was real, what did it mean? What could it mean? The line between us was growing thinner by the day, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold myself back from crossing it. The days unfolded with a rhythm that felt both comforting and precarious. Ryan and I settled into an unspoken routine. Morning coffees, afternoons spent in the garden or around the house, and evenings where our conversations stretched late into the night. Yet, beneath the surface, something else was growing. A tension, a magnetism that I could no longer ignore. It was the small things at first. The way his hand would linger a moment too long when passing me a cup, or how his voice softened when he said my name. His gaze, once casual and familial, now seemed to linger, filled with something I dared not acknowledge. I caught myself doing the same, my eyes tracing the contours of his face, my thoughts wandering into territories I never thought possible. One evening, after a long day working side by side in the garden, we retreated to the porch with glasses of wine in hand. The summer air was warm and heavy with the scent of blooming flowers. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his shirt untucked, his sleeves rolled up, and for the first time, I noticed how the dim light played on his strong, tan arms. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "this summer has been different. I've felt more at home here than I have in years." I smiled, trying to brush off the strange flutter in my chest. "I'm glad. You've brought life to this house." He looked at me then, his piercing blue eyes locking onto mine. "And you've brought something back to me," he said softly. "Something I thought I'd lost." The words hung in the air, charged with meaning I wasn't ready to confront. I turned away, focusing on the glass in my hand. But I felt his gaze on me, as if waiting for me to say something, to acknowledge what we both felt but couldn't name. A storm rolled in that night, and the rain drummed against the windows as we sat in the living room, candles flickering on the coffee table. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost surreal. Ryan's presence beside me was comforting, yet it made my pulse quicken. He shifted closer, his knee brushing against mine, and I froze. "Thank you for letting me stay here," he said, his voice low and almost hesitant. "I know it hasn't been easy for you." "It's been nice," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "The house feels warmer." He reached out then, his hand resting lightly on mine. It was meant to be a comforting gesture, I'm sure, but the warmth of his touch sent a jolt through me. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. Instead, I looked at him, and in his eyes, I saw a reflection of my own longing. "I don't know what's happening," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "Maybe we both need this," he said, his voice barely audible. His hand tightened slightly around mine, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. The storm, the flickering candlelight, the walls of propriety I had built around myself, it all dissolved into nothing. I pulled back suddenly, my heart racing. "Ryan, this isn't..." I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't know what to say, how to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions inside me. He didn't press me, but the intensity in his gaze lingered. "I don't want to hurt you," he said softly. I can't pretend I don't feel something." The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances and unspoken words. I tried to maintain distance, to retreat into the safety of routine, but every time he walked into the room, I felt the pull. It was undeniable, irresistible, and utterly terrifying. One afternoon, as we worked together in the garden, he paused and looked at me, his expression serious. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to start over?" he asked. His question caught me off guard. "Start over?" I echoed. "To go back and make different choices," he said. "To take a chance on something unexpected." I didn't know how to respond. His words felt like a challenge, an invitation, and my resolve wavered. Later that evening, as we sat watching an old black-and-white film, the silence between us felt heavier than ever. I could feel his eyes on me, and when I finally looked at him, I saw the question in his gaze. He leaned forward, his face just inches from mine. I should have stopped him, should have pulled away, but I didn't. Instead, I let his lips brush against mine in a tentative, hesitant kiss. It was soft, warm, and filled with a tenderness that took my breath away. When we pulled back, the room felt charged, the air thick with unspoken words. "This changes everything," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know," he replied, his hand lingering on mine. "But maybe it's time for a change." The kiss changed everything. It was as if the floodgates had opened, releasing a torrent of emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. For days after, I avoided Ryan, retreating into the garden or losing myself in household tasks to drown out the sound of my racing thoughts. But the memory of that moment, his touch, the warmth of his lips, the intensity in his gaze, haunted me. Ryan, however, didn't pull away. He wasn't forceful, but he was steady, present, and unshaken by the shift in our dynamic. Every time I walked into the room, I could feel his presence like an unspoken question lingering in the air. It terrified me how much I longed to answer it. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the porch in a golden glow, Ryan approached me with a quiet determination. He carried 2 glasses of wine, offering one to me without a word. I hesitated but accepted, unable to deny the pull between us. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sky change colors. Finally he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I know this isn't easy for you." I looked down at my glass, the wine swirling like the storm in my chest. "It's not supposed to be easy," I murmured. "It's not supposed to be anything." "But it is," he said firmly, his gaze unwavering. "It's something whether we want to admit it or not." His words sent a shiver through me. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him we couldn't continue down this path, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself looking at him, really looking, and seeing not just the man he had become, but the connection we shared. It wasn't simple, but it was undeniable. Before I could stop myself, I spoke. "What are we doing, Ryan?" He leaned closer, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know it feels right." His honesty struck me like a bolt of lightning. In that moment, all the walls I had built around myself seemed to crumble. I leaned forward, closing the distance between us, and kissed him again. This time, it wasn't tentative. It was filled with all the longing, fear, and hope I had been holding back. The world outside faded away as we gave in to the pull between us. His hands were warm, steady, and reassuring, and for the first time in years I felt alive. Every touch, every whispered word, seemed to erase the years of solitude and pain I had endured. But the euphoria didn't last. As the days passed, the weight of what we were doing began to settle over me like a heavy fog. I couldn't ignore the implications, the societal judgment, or the potential fallout. Every glance from Ryan, every stolen moment, felt like a battle between my heart and my conscience. It all came to a head one afternoon when my oldest friend, Sophie, called. She had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong, and this time was no different. "You sound distracted," she said, her tone laced with concern. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Finally I spoke, my voice trembling. "It's complicated, Sophie." There was a pause on the other end of the line before she spoke again, her voice softer now. "Martha, I've known you for decades. You don't have to tell me everything, but please be careful. Whatever it is, don't lose yourself in it." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I felt the weight of her warning pressing down on me. When Ryan joined me, I couldn't meet his gaze. He sat beside me, his presence warm and steady, but I could feel the unspoken tension between us. "Is something wrong?" he asked gently. I shook my head, but the tears in my eyes betrayed me. "I don't know how to do this, Ryan," I admitted. "I don't know how to reconcile what I feel with what's right." He reached for my hand, his touch comforting but also electrifying. "We don't have to have all the answers right now," he said softly. "We just have to be honest with each other." His words were both reassuring and terrifying. I knew he was right, but I also knew that honesty meant facing the reality of our situation, a reality that could tear us apart. The breaking point came one quiet evening as we sat together on the porch. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I could feel the weight of my decision bearing down on me. I turned to Ryan, my heart heavy but resolute. "This has to stop," I said, my voice trembling. "We can't keep pretending this is something we can pursue." He looked at me, his expression pained but understanding. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "But I don't want to hurt you, either." His words broke something inside me. I reached out, placing a hand on his cheek, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, the weight of our emotions hanging between us. "This isn't about wanting or not wanting," I said softly. "It's about what's right. And this can't be right." Ryan nodded slowly, his eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "If this is what you want," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'll go." The next morning, I watched from the porch as he packed his things into his car. He looked up at me one last time, his gaze filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Then he was gone, leaving the house emptier than it had ever felt before. As the days turned into weeks, the pain of his absence was a constant ache in my chest. I tried to find solace in the routines of my life, but every corner of the house seemed to hold a memory of him. It was only through time, reflection, and the support of friends like Sophie that I began to heal. Eventually, I came to understand that while our connection was real and powerful, it was also fleeting, a moment that had come and gone, leaving me forever changed. It wasn't easy, but I found peace in knowing that I had made the right choice, even if it had broken my heart in the process. Ryan's departure left a silence in the house that was almost unbearable. Every room seemed to echo with his presence. The faint scent of his cologne in the living room, the garden where we had worked side by side, the empty chair across from me at the breakfast table. The quiet, once a source of comfort, now felt like a suffocating void. For the first few days, I wandered the house aimlessly, my mind replaying every moment we had shared. The warmth of his smile, the way his laughter had filled the air, the tender moments that had crossed boundaries I never thought I would breach, they all haunted me. I told myself I had done the right thing, yet the pain in my chest refused to abate. Sophie called often, sensing my turmoil, even though I avoided sharing the details. "You'll heal, Martha," she said one afternoon, her voice steady and reassuring. "Time has a way of softening even the deepest wounds." Her words were a comfort, but they didn't lessen the ache. I found myself drawn to the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, and imagining Ryan sitting beside me. The memories were bittersweet, a mixture of longing and regret that refused to let go. I immersed myself in distractions, gardening, sorting through old belongings, and even joining a local book club. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the memories of that summer lingered. It wasn't just the connection we had shared, it was the way he had awakened something within me, a vitality, a sense of being seen and understood that I hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, while rummaging through a box of George's old books in the attic, I came across a letter he had written to me early in our marriage. His words were filled with love and encouragement, reminding me of the strength and resilience he had always seen in me. As I read his words, I felt a renewed determination to honor his memory and the life we had built together. But healing was not a linear process. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when the ache in my chest felt almost unbearable. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Ryan was thinking of me too. Those moments were the hardest, when the memories felt too vivid, too real, and the absence of him too profound. Weeks turned into months, and slowly the edges of my grief began to soften. I found solace in small moments: the warmth of the sun on my face as I tended to the garden, the laughter of friends during book club meetings, the quiet comfort of a good book on a rainy afternoon. Life began to take on a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around Ryan's presence. One day, while grocery shopping, I caught sight of a young man who bore a striking resemblance to him. My heart skipped a beat, and for a fleeting moment, I felt that familiar rush of emotions. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't him, and instead of disappointment, I felt a sense of relief. It was as if the universe was gently reminding me to let go, to release the past and move forward. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I allowed myself to reflect on the summer and all it had brought me. It wasn't just about Ryan, it was about what he had awakened in me. He had reminded me of my capacity for love, connection, and even heartbreak, a reminder that I was still alive, still capable of feeling deeply. Gradually, I began to find a sense of peace. I reconnected with old friends, deepened my bond with Sophie, and even entertained the idea of new beginnings. At a holiday gathering, I met Henry, a retired professor with a gentle smile and a quick wit. Our conversations were easy and comforting, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. Ryan's presence in my life had been fleeting, but the impact he left was profound. He had reminded me of who I was, a woman who had loved deeply, lost greatly, and still had the courage to embrace life's uncertainties. The connection we shared, though unconventional and fleeting, had been a catalyst for growth, pushing me to rediscover parts of myself I had thought long buried. As the seasons changed, so did I. The pain of Ryan's absence began to fade, replaced by a gentle nostalgia for what we had shared. I could think of him now without the sharp pang of loss, instead feeling gratitude for the ways he had touched my life. By the time winter arrived, I had found a new sense of equilibrium. Henry and I had grown closer, and our evenings together were filled with warmth and companionship. It wasn't the fiery passion I had felt with Ryan, but it was steady and comforting. a reminder that life had a way of providing what we needed, even if it wasn't what we expected. As I sat on the porch one crisp autumn evening, a cup of tea warming my hands, I thought of Ryan and smiled. He had been a chapter in my story, one that had brought both joy and pain, but also profound growth. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, I felt ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. As time passed, the sting of Ryan's absence gradually gave way to a quiet acceptance. The once overwhelming ache in my chest dulled, replaced by a soft nostalgia for the summer we had shared. I found myself reflecting on the experience not with regret, but with gratitude for the lessons it had taught me. Life has a way of surprising us, guiding us along paths we never imagined. Ryan's presence had illuminated parts of me I thought had disappeared, my capacity to feel, to connect, and to embrace vulnerability. He reminded me of the depth of human emotion and the courage it takes to face it head-on. Sophie, my steadfast confidant, was a constant source of support. During one of our many conversations over tea, she remarked, "You've been through the storm, Martha, but you've come out the other side stronger. You've rediscovered yourself in ways most people never do." Her words resonated deeply. She was right. I had spent so many years locked in a routine of quiet solitude, convinced that my days of love and connection were behind me. But Ryan had changed that. His presence, though brief, was a catalyst for transformation. I began to understand that what I had shared with Ryan wasn't just about forbidden feelings or fleeting passion. It was about rediscovering my own worth, my own desires, and my ability to live fully, even in the face of uncertainty. He had shown me that life's beauty lies in its unpredictability, in the moments that challenge us to grow. As winter settled in, I found myself embracing new opportunities. I joined a local book club, rekindled old friendships, and even started attending community events. It was during one such gathering that I met Henry, a retired professor whose warm smile and easy laughter were a balm to my still-healing heart. Henry and I formed a bond that was steady and comforting, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. It wasn't the fiery, unpredictable connection I had felt with Ryan, but it was something I cherished deeply. A reminder that life offers second chances in its own quiet, unexpected way. Looking back on my time with Ryan, I came to see it as a gift. It was a chapter of self-discovery, a time of awakening that reminded me of the depth of my own emotions and my ability to connect with others. It wasn't about the ending, it was about the journey, the lessons learned, and the strength gained. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I allowed myself a moment to think of Ryan. I wondered where he was, what he was doing, and if he ever thought of me. The thought no longer filled me with pain, but with a gentle fondness. He had been a fleeting presence in my life, but one that had left a lasting imprint. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a sense of peace. The experience had taught me to trust life's journey, to embrace its uncertainties, and to find beauty even in the moments that challenge us. Ryan had awakened something within me, a reminder that even in life's later chapters, we are capable of love, growth, and profound connection. And as I sat there, the cool breeze brushing against my skin, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. If you were in Martha's position, what would you have done? Would you have followed your heart or upheld the boundaries society dictates? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories of love, loss, and self-discovery. Stay tuned for the next tale. You won't believe the twists it takes.